My name is Chloe. I'm 29 years old. And the morning after my beautiful, exhausting wedding, my mother stole my $10,000 first-class honeymoon tickets so she and my younger sister could go to Hawaii instead. I hadn't done anything to provoke it. I paid for my entire wedding out of my own pocket. But because I didn't spend enough time praising her in my reception speech, she decided I was ungrateful. While I was tearing apart my bridal suite in a blind panic, she was sipping a mimosa at Terminal 3, texting me that she was doing this to teach me a lesson. But there was one massive, catastrophic detail my mother didn't know. A detail that was about to turn her stolen luxury getaway into a spectacular, federal nightmare. Before I go on, if this story resonates with you, hit like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with it. Drop your city and local time in the comments. To understand the sheer, unadulterated audacity of my mother, Brenda, you have to understand the deeply fractured dynamic I grew up in. In our house, oxygen was a finite resource, and my younger sister, Mia, breathed all of it. Mia was the undeniable golden child. At 25 years old, she had never held a full-time job, still lived at home rent-free, and was treated by my mother like a fragile, misunderstood artist who simply hadn't found her muse yet. I, on the other hand, was the family workhorse. I moved out at 18, clawed my way through college on scholarships and night shifts, and built a highly successful career in marketing. My independence wasn't celebrated, it was fiercely resented. To Brenda, my ability to take care of myself meant she didn't get to play the savior, which freed up all her time to aggressively coddle Mia. If I bought a new car, Brenda would sigh and say it was a shame Mia had to take the bus. If I got a promotion, Brenda would remind me that corporate life was draining and Mia was protecting her peace. This toxic dynamic was on full, blinding display at my wedding just 12 hours ago. My new husband Julian and I had planned a gorgeous, intimate ceremony at a historic downtown hotel. We paid for every single calla lily, every bacon-wrapped scallop, and every drop of vintage champagne. Yet, from the moment Brenda arrived, she treated the event like her own personal coronation, with Mia as her lady-in-waiting. Mia showed up to my bridal suite, wearing a floor-length, heavily beaded gown in a shade Brenda fiercely defended as pale champagne. It wasn't champagne. In the photographs, under the flash of the cameras, it was stark, bridal white. When I gently confronted them about it, my mother just rolled her eyes, adjusting Mia's hair. "Oh, please don't be so terribly insecure today, Chloe," Brenda had scoffed, waving me off. "It's just a dress. Mia went through a breakup 6 months ago, and this is the first time she's felt pretty. Just let her have this one little thing." I swallowed the lump in my throat and let her have it. I let my mother complain loudly about her placement on the seating chart, claiming she was too close to the drafty doors. I let her physically elbow her way into Julian's and my first dance photos. But the final, unforgivable offense, the one that apparently sealed my fate in Brenda's mind, happened during the toasts. I stood up and gave a speech thanking our guests. I specifically thanked Julian's parents for coming to the venue at 7:00 a.m. to help us construct the floral arch. I thanked my mother, too, but I kept it brief and polite. I didn't lavish her with the tearful, unearned worship she felt she was owed for simply giving birth to me. I saw her jaw clench from across the room. I saw her whispering furiously into Mia's ear, her eyes completely devoid of warmth. I knew a punishment was coming. I just didn't know it would cost 5 figures. What Brenda also didn't know, what I had kept fiercely protected for 3 years, was the truth about the man I had just married. Julian is one of the kindest, most grounded, and sharply intelligent men you will ever meet. Whenever my family interrogated him about what he did for a living, Julian would give a polite, vague smile and say, "I work in corporate logistics for an airline." He happily let them assume he was a mid-level pencil pusher coordinating baggage carousels and creating spreadsheets. The reality? Julian was the vice president of operations for a major international airline. He possessed a level of corporate authority and wealth that would make my mother's head spin. We kept his exact title a strict secret for one simple reason. Brenda was a chronic grifter. If she knew Julian had access to top-tier airline perks, she would have relentlessly harassed us for free flights to Paris, Milan, and Tokyo. She would have weaponized his success, demanding first-class upgrades for her and Mia, while calling me a selfish, horrible daughter if we ever set a boundary. Julian and I agreed early on that keeping my family on a strict information diet was the only way to protect our peace. So, when Julian briefly mentioned to my mother that he had managed to score some employee discount passes for our honeymoon to Maui, Brenda just wrinkled her nose, utterly unimpressed. She had no idea that those passes were elite, executive tier, lie-flat pod tickets. And she certainly had no idea how aggressively those specific tickets were monitored by federal aviation systems. She was about to find out. The morning after a wedding is supposed to be wrapped in a quiet golden haze of exhaustion and bliss. At 6:00 a.m., the sunlight was just beginning to slice through the heavy blackout curtains of our bridal suite. Our suitcases were zipped and sitting obediently by the door. In 4 hours, Julian and I were scheduled to board a flight to Maui for 10 days of uninterrupted paradise. I slipped out of bed, leaving Julian tangled in the sheets, and walked over to the closet. My body ached from dancing in heels, but I was practically buzzing with excitement. I made a terrible cup of hotel room coffee, punched my 4-digit code into the digital safe bolted to the closet shelf, and waited for the familiar green light and mechanical. The heavy metal door swung open. My passport was there. Julian's passport was there. My diamond tennis bracelet from the night before was resting in its velvet pouch, but the folder was gone. I blinked, my sleep-deprived brain struggling to process the visual input. The thick, navy blue leather folder bearing the airline's silver crest wasn't in the safe. "Julian?" My voice came out as a thin, reedy whisper, barely louder than the hum of the air conditioner. Julian shifted, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. His relaxed, post-wedding smile faded the second he saw my face. Julian was a man built for logistics and crisis management. He could read a room's barometric pressure in an instant. "What's wrong, Chloe?" "The folder," I said, my hands trembling as I frantically patted down the empty corners of the safe. "The navy one with the itineraries. It's not in here." He was out of bed and at my side in 2 seconds flat. "I watched you put it in there last night before we went down to the reception. I watched you punch the code." "I know!" Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at my throat. I dropped to my knees and started tearing through my overnight bag. "Julian, those were the physical executive passes. The ones with the security holograms. You said we needed those to bypass the main terminal?" "Hey, look at me. Breathe," Julian said, his hands gently gripping my shoulders to ground me. "We have digital backups on my secure app. We aren't going to miss the flight. But you're right. A heavy leather folder doesn't just grow legs and walk out of a locked steel box." I sat back on my heels, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stared at the keypad. 412. April 12th. My birthday. A painfully obvious code to anyone who actually knew me. "The code," I whispered, the blood draining from my face. "Julian, my mother was in this room last night." The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. At around 11:30 p.m., right before the cake cutting, Brenda had pulled me aside into the hallway. She had been dramatically rubbing her temples, claiming she had a blinding migraine from the tacky, loud music the DJ was playing. "Chloe, my head is absolutely splitting," she had whined, leaning heavily against the wall. "Can I borrow your spare keycard? I just need to lie down in your suite for 20 minutes in the quiet. Oh, and give me the safe code, would you? I want to take off this heavy heirloom necklace and I don't trust leaving it on the nightstand." I had been so exhausted, so desperate to just get back to my husband and enjoy my wedding. that I didn't question it. I thought I was being accommodating. I thought I was being a good daughter. She took them, I choked out, the realization tasting like copper in my mouth. Julian, my mother was up here for 30 minutes unsupervised. Julian's face went completely still. It was the same unreadable, hardened expression he wore when a multi-million-dollar contract negotiation was heading south. Brenda, why on earth would she take a folder of travel documents? She doesn't even know where we're staying. Because she's Brenda, I cried out, hot tears of pure, unadulterated frustration finally spilling over. She doesn't care where we're going. She just cares that I, Star, am going somewhere she isn't. She's probably holding them hostage to punish me for my speech. She's waiting for me to call her crying and beg for them back. End quote. If she took them for petty revenge, that's one thing, Julian said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, lethal calm. But Chloe, those aren't just paper tickets. Those are VIP executive credentials. They are flagged as internal employee use only Star in the global aviation system. Before I could process what that meant, my phone lit up on the nightstand. It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't an apology. It was an iMessage from Brenda. My hand shook so violently I almost dropped the phone as I swiped to open the notification. It was a high-resolution photo. My mother and Mia were standing in front of a massive, floor-to-ceiling window at the airport, the morning sun silhouetting a wide-body jet behind them. Brenda was wearing her oversized designer sunglasses inside, holding a plastic cup of airport mimosa. Mia was standing next to her, grinning a vicious, triumphant smile. And in Mia's hand, held up to the camera like a hunting trophy, was my navy blue leather folder. Below the photo was a block of text that felt like a slap across the face. Since you were so incredibly selfish yesterday and couldn't even manage to properly honor your family in front of your guests, we've decided to take this lesson into our own hands. Mia has been so depressed lately, and she needs this luxury more than you do. You're young, you have your whole life to travel. Consider this your payment for the years of stress you've caused me by being so independent. We're going to Hawaii. Don't bother calling or trying to ruin this for us. See you in 10 days! Mom! I dropped the phone onto the duvet, completely paralyzed. The sheer audacity of it was suffocating. She hadn't just stolen a vacation, she had violated our private sanctuary. She had stolen our first memory as a married couple and was gloating about it from a terminal 10 miles away. They're at the airport, I whispered, staring blankly at the wall. They're actually going to board our flight. Julian reached over, picked up my phone, and read the text. I braced myself. I expected him to yell. I expected him to start frantically dialing the police. Instead, Julian let out a short, dry chuckle. A slow, calculating smile spread across his face. A smile that sent a shiver straight down my spine. She thinks she's teaching you a lesson? Julian asked, his eyes locking onto mine, burning with a sudden, intense brightness. She's insane, Julian. She's going to get on that plane. No, Julian said, standing up and reaching for his laptop bag with terrifying precision. She isn't. She thinks she stole 2 seats on an airplane. What she doesn't realize is that she just walked right into a federal security trap that I designed myself. He looked at his watch. Les Warren Cosmar, 6:45 a.m. Get dressed, Chloe, Julian said, tossing me my jeans. We're going to the airport. But we aren't going to the gate. The drive to the airport was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Usually, Julian and I filled our car rides with endless chatter, debating podcasts, planning our week, or just humming along to the radio. But that morning, the interior of his SUV felt pressurized, like the cabin of a jet right before it hits maximum altitude. I sat in the passenger seat, my fingers white-knuckling the leather door handle. My mind was spinning on a toxic loop. My own mother. My sister. They had actually packed their bags, driven to our wedding hotel, manipulated their way into our private suite, and stolen our honeymoon. It wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, premeditated strike. My phone buzzed again, vibrating violently against the center console. I flinched. Another text from Brenda. "Oh, and Chloe? Don't bother calling the Four Seasons in Maui to try and ruin this. I already called them pretending to be you and confirmed the name change for our arrival. They were more than happy to accommodate the bride's mother once I explained you were feeling unwell. Try to use this time at home to reflect on your attitude. Aloha!" I let out a shaky, jagged breath, the sheer, narcissistic entitlement of the message knocking the wind out of me. "She called the resort, Julian. She actually thinks she can just step into my life. She thinks she holds all the cards." Julian didn't take his eyes off the road. He effortlessly merged into the fast lane, accelerating toward the airport, his jaw set in a line of glacial calm. "She thinks she's playing a game of Mother Knows Best," Julian said, his voice dropping into a cold, professional register I had rarely heard him use. "She thinks this is just another family squabble where she can bulldoze you and wait for you to apologize." He flicked his blinker on, bypassing the exit for general passenger drop-off. "But she's not in your childhood living room right now, Chloe," Julian continued. "She's in a federally regulated transportation hub, and she is currently in possession of documents that carry my corporate security clearance. In her mind, she stole a luxury vacation. In the eyes of the FAA and federal law, she has committed grand larceny and is attempting to bypass security with restricted executive credentials." I turned to look at him, my heart hammering. "Julian, are you really going to have them arrested?" A part of me, the deeply conditioned part that had spent 29 years tiptoeing around Brenda's moods to keep the peace, flinched at the thought of the fallout. Julian pulled the car into a restricted, gated roadway marked, "Are authorized personnel only." He flashed a badge at a security guard, who immediately waved us through. He parked the car, turned off the engine, and looked me dead in the eyes. "Chloe, if a stranger walked into our hotel room, stole $10,000 worth of property, and texted you to reflect on your attitude, would you call the police?" "Yes," I whispered. "Then why does she get a free pass just because she shares your DNA?" He reached over and took my hand, his grip warm and steady. "This isn't just about the tickets, honey. This is about the next 40 years of our lives. If we let her walk onto that plane today, she will own us forever. She will do this to our first house, our first child, our every milestone. Today, the lesson ends." He was right. I looked at the towering glass terminal of the airport looming above us. For the first time in my life, the fog of familial guilt lifted. I didn't feel like a scared daughter trying to earn love from a woman who had none to give. I felt like an adult standing up to a bully. Julian pulled out his phone and bypassed his normal contacts, opening a secure, encrypted app. He hit dial and put it on speaker. "Security control, this is Miller," a gruff voice answered almost immediately. "Greg, it's Julian Vance. I'm in the employee garage now. Did you get the flagged PNR codes I sent over the secure line 10 minutes ago?" "Got 'em, Mr. Vance," Greg replied. I could hear the rapid clacking of a keyboard in the background. "I'm looking at the live feed right now. 2 females. Checked in at the first-class automated kiosk about 12 minutes ago. They're currently heading toward the Gold Track Priority Security line. They've got the physical Navy executive folders in hand." "Are they aware they are being monitored?" Julian asked. "Negative. They look like they're having the time of their lives, sir. One of them is wearing a bridal sun hat and taking a lot of selfies." I closed my eyes. That was Mara Sklar custom honeymoon hat. "Keep them moving," Julian ordered, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Don't intercept them at TSA. I want them to get through. I want them to get all the way to the boarding desk at the gate. Let them think they've actually gotten away with it." "You got it, boss. The system is rigged to flag red the second those barcodes hit the gate scanner. We'll have Port Authority standing by in the shadows at gate A12. Just give the word." Julian hung up and looked at me, a dangerous spark in his eyes. "Ready to go to work, Mrs. Vance?" I nodded, my pulse racing with a sudden potent mix of adrenaline and vindication. We stepped out of the car. We didn't head toward the crowded check-in counters or the chaotic baggage claim. Julian led me through an unmarked steel door. We bypassed the 3-hour security lines, went through a private biometric screening area, and stepped into the hidden subterranean heart of the airport's operations. As we walked briskly through the pristine, quiet corridors, every pilot, flight attendant, and ground crew member we passed stood a little straighter. "Morning, Mr. Vance," they'd say. "Congratulations on the wedding, sir." Julian just nodded, moving with a singular, terrifying focus. He was bringing me into his empire, and my mother had absolutely no idea whose castle she had just tried to rob. We stepped through a set of heavy, biometric steel doors and entered the nerve center of the airport. The security control room was a massive, dimly lit, circular space that looked like it belonged in a military bunker rather than a commercial airport. The air conditioning was freezing, and the only sound was the low hum of server towers and the hushed voices of a dozen security analysts sitting at curved desks. Covering the entire front wall was a grid of ultra-high-definition monitors displaying live feeds from every corner of the terminals, tarmac, and customs checkpoints. As Julian and I walked in, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a graying buzz cut stood up from the center console. "Mr. Vance," he said, extending a hand. "Congratulations on the wedding. Wish the circumstances of your visit today were a bit more celebratory." "Thanks, Greg," Julian replied, shaking his hand firmly. "This is my wife, Chloe." "Chloe, this is Greg Miller, our director of airport security." "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am," Greg said, offering a sympathetic nod. "We've got your VIPs queued up on the main screen. They've certainly been making themselves comfortable." Greg tapped a few keys on his dashboard, and the center 80-inch monitor flared to life. There they were, in crystal clear 4K resolution. My mother and sister were sitting in the ultra-exclusive, invite-only first-class lounge near Gate A12. Brenda had kicked off her heels and was resting her bare feet on a custom leather ottoman, waving a manicured hand at a lounge attendant to demand a refill on her mimosa. Mia was sprawled across a velvet sofa, furiously typing on her phone, likely bragging on Instagram about her spontaneous luxury getaway. Seeing them up there on the screen, completely oblivious to the fact that they were being watched by the vice president of operations and a team of federal security analysts, gave me a sudden, intense wave of vertigo. For 29 years, my mother had been the tallest, loudest, most terrifying figure in my life. She was the architect of my guilt and the judge of my worth. But looking at her through the lens of that security camera, surrounded by millions of dollars of aviation technology that answered to underskull my husband, she suddenly looked incredibly small. She looked foolish. "They bypassed the initial ID check at the first-class kiosk," Julian explained, his eyes fixed on the screen with that same slow, calculating smile I had seen in our hotel room. "The automated kiosks don't verify biometric or federal ID against executive passes. They just print the physical slip if you have the QR code, which they got from your stolen folder. They think that printed slip is their golden ticket." "But it's not?" I asked, my eyes glued to Mia adjusting my honeymoon hat on her head. "Not even close," Greg chimed in, leaning over his console. "Executive tier passes are deeply embedded in the FAA's employee monitoring system. When a standard passenger boards a plane, the gate scanner just checks to make sure the name on the ticket matches the flight manifest. But when an executive pass is scanned, the system triggers a hard stop," Julian finished, his voice dropping an octave. "It requires the gate agent to physically verify the passenger's federal ID against my approved corporate beneficiary list. It's an anti-fraud measure to prevent exactly this kind of theft. The second that gate agent scans Brenda's stolen ticket, her screen is going to flash red, lock her out, and flag a code 4. Attempted corporate identity fraud." I stared at Julian, the sheer magnitude of the trap finally clicking into place. "She's not just going to be denied boarding. She's going to trigger a security alarm. She committed grand larceny when she took that folder from your safe," Julian said softly, stepping up behind me and placing his hands on my shoulders. She committed fraud when she called the resort pretending to be you, and in exactly 10 minutes, when first-class boarding begins, she is going to attempt to bypass federal airport security using stolen corporate credentials. On the screen, Brenda sat up. She grabbed her oversized designer tote bag and tapped Mia on the shoulder. Mia jumped up, grabbing the stolen navy blue folder. They were laughing. I could practically hear my mother's smug, triumphant voice echoing through the silent control room. "Flight 802 to Maui is beginning pre-boarding, Mr. Vance," Greg announced, watching his secondary monitor. "The gate agent has just arrived at the podium." "Perfect," Julian said. He checked the cuff of his dress shirt, straightened his jacket, and looked at me. The protective, fiercely loving warmth in his eyes was back, completely eclipsing the cold corporate executive. "Do you want to watch it happen on the screen, Chloe? Or do you want to go down there and see her face when the music stops?" I looked at the monitor one last time. I thought about the white dress Mia wore to my wedding. I thought about the hollow, loveless toast Brenda gave. I thought about the sheer, blinding entitlement it took to steal a daughter's honeymoon. I turned away from the screens and looked at my husband. "Let's go to the gate," I said. The walk from the security control room to gate A12 felt like marching to the drumbeat of my own racing heart. Julian didn't take me through the main concourse. Instead, we navigated a labyrinth of gray, windowless corridors that ran behind the walls of the public terminal. We passed luggage conveyors and break rooms, moving with swift, silent purpose. Every step I took away from the God's eye view of the cameras and closer to the physical reality of my mother grounded me. The lingering tendrils of lifelong intimidation were burning off, replaced by a white-hot, righteous clarity. "We're going to step out through the door just behind the boarding podium," Julian said softly, swiping his master badge against a steel door marked Gate A12 Staff Only. "Stay right behind me until the scanner goes off." He pushed the door open, and we slipped into the small glass-walled alcove connected directly to the jet bridge, positioned just a few feet behind the gate agent's desk. We were completely obscured by the frosted glass of the boarding door, but we had a perfect, unobstructed view of the waiting area. And there they were. Brenda and Mia had positioned themselves at the absolute front of the priority boarding lane, practically toe-to-toe with the velvet rope. They were surrounded by exhausted families and business travelers, but they stood with their chins tilted up, projecting an aura of manufactured royalty. My mother was loudly complaining to Mia about the stale air in the terminal, ensuring everyone around them knew they were flying first class. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," the gate agent announced over the PA system. Her name tag read, Sarah. "We are now beginning the boarding process for Flight 802 to Maui. At this time, we invite our first-class passengers and VIP executive members to approach the podium." Brenda practically shoved a man in a business suit out of the way to get to the scanner first. Mia was right on her heels, clutching the navy blue leather folder. Brenda snatched the printed boarding passes from Mia's hand and slapped them face down onto the glass of the optical scanner with an arrogant flourish. She was expecting the cheerful, melodic that signals clearance. Instead, the machine let out a harsh, flat BZZZ toll. A solid red light illuminated the scanner bed. Brenda sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes at the passengers behind her as if dealing with incompetent staff was an exhausting burden. "The machine is broken," she told Sarah sharply. "We're in seats 2A and 2B. Just let us through." Sarah, a seasoned professional, offered a polite, practiced smile. "I apologize for the inconvenience, ma'am. Sometimes the system just needs a manual refresh. May I please see your government-issued ID?" "It's under Vance," Brenda lied smoothly, using my married name without a second of hesitation. "But here is my license. Just fix it quickly, please. We have pre-flight champagne waiting." Brenda handed over her driver's license. Sarah took it, glanced at the name, Huntersclog Brenda Hayes, and began typing on her keyboard to bypass the error. From our hiding spot behind the frosted glass, Julian and I watched Sarah's face. It took exactly 3 seconds for the system to process the discrepancy. Sarah's polite smile vanished, replaced by a sudden, rigid professionalism. She stared at her monitor. The screen facing her, which we couldn't see, had just locked out completely, flashing a blaring warning. Code 4. Restricted credentials. Attempted corporate fraud. "Ma'am," Sarah said, her voice dropping all traces of customer service cheer. "These passes are flagged as non-transferable executive employee credentials. They are strictly registered to Chloe and Julian Vance. Your ID does not match the corporate beneficiary registry." Brenda's posture stiffened. "There's been a mix-up," she said, her voice rising in pitch, the classic Brenda tactic of getting louder to intimidate service workers. "Those are daughter's tickets. I am the mother of the bride. She gifted them to us this morning because she couldn't make the flight. Now, open the door." "I cannot do that, ma'am," Sarah replied firmly, taking a step back from the podium. "Transferring executive credentials is a federal violation. I need to retain these documents and ask you to step aside." "Excuse me?" Brenda shrieked, slamming her hand on the counter. The entire gate area went dead silent. "Do you have any idea how much these tickets cost? You are ruining our vacation. I want to speak to your manager right now." "That won't be necessary, Sarah." A deep, commanding voice echoed across the gate. Julian pushed open the frosted glass door. I stepped out right beside him. The blood drained from Brenda's face so fast, I thought she was going to pass out. Mia visibly recoiled, dropping her oversized tote bag onto the carpet with a heavy thud. For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. My mother stared at me, then at Julian, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. The mental gymnastics were practically visible on her face as she tried to salvage the situation. Suddenly, the shrieking, entitled Karen vanished, and the sickeningly sweet, doting mother appeared. "Chloe! Julian!" Brenda gasped, forcing a shrill, hysterical laugh. "Oh my goodness, surprise! We were just trying to hold the plane for you. We saw you left your folder, and we rushed all the way down here to make sure you didn't miss your flight." "Save it, Brenda," I said, my voice steady and cold. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. Julian stepped up to the podium, placing his hand over Sarah's monitor. He didn't look at my mother as a son-in-law. He looked at her like a trespasser in his house. "Sarah." "Thank you," Julian said to the gate agent. He turned his eyes back to Brenda, and his voice carried the weight of an absolute executive execution. "My name is Julian Vance. I am the vice president of operations for this airline, and you are not holding a plane. You are currently attempting to commit federal identity fraud with stolen corporate property." Brenda gasped, her fake smile shattering into a million pieces. For a moment, the entire boarding area of Gate A12 felt like it had been encased in amber. The exhausted business travelers stopped typing on their laptops. The families wrangling toddlers went dead silent. Everyone was staring at the podium. Brenda's mouth hung open, her eyes darting between my face and Julian's. The words "Hundersklag Vice President of Operations Sklex" seemed to short-circuit her brain. For her entire life, she had bullied customer service workers, manipulated managers, and weaponized her status as a paying customer to get her way. But standing in front of the executive who literally controlled the air underneath her feet, her usual tactics evaporated. Then, the shock morphed into something much uglier, cornered, desperate rage. "You lied to me!" Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing off the high terminal ceilings. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Julian. "You told me you were just some mid-level logistics coordinator! You deliberately deceived your own family!" "I protected my peace," Julian corrected, his voice as smooth and unyielding as granite. "And I protected my wife from exactly this kind of parasitic behavior. You didn't steal a vacation from a logistics coordinator, Brenda. You stole restricted executive assets from a corporate officer." Mia, who had been shrinking backward toward the velvet ropes, suddenly realized the gravity of the situation. Her smug, victorious smirk had completely vanished, replaced by the panicked realization that her mother couldn't yell them out of this. "Mom," Mia whimpered, tugging on Brenda's sleeve. Mom, everybody is staring. Let's just go home. Give them the tickets back. We are not going home! Brenda snapped, violently shaking Mia off. She turned her venom toward me. Her face flushed a blotchy, furious red. Chloe, tell him to stop this right now! Tell him to authorize these passes! I am your mother! I gave you life! You owe me this trip after the humiliating, disrespectful way you treated me at your wedding! I stepped forward. I didn't shrink. I didn't look down. For the first time in 29 years, my heart wasn't pounding with anxiety when my mother raised her voice. It was beating with a steady, empowering rhythm of absolute liberation. I don't owe you a damn thing, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent terminal. I paid for my own life. I paid for my own wedding, and I certainly paid for the $10,000 honeymoon you broke into my room to steal. I didn't break in! You gave me the code! She screamed, spit flying from her lips. She was completely unraveling, entirely blind to the audience watching her self-destruct. You manipulated me so you could commit theft, I replied. And then you gloated about it. You thought you were teaching me a lesson about gratitude? Well, you did. I'm finally grateful to see exactly who you are. Brenda let out a frustrated scream and slammed her hand against the gate scanner, trying to grab the printed boarding passes back from Sarah, the gate agent. Fine! Take your stupid tickets! We'll buy our own! We're flying to Maui today, whether you like it or not! Actually, Brenda, you aren't flying anywhere, Julian said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just raised his hand and gave a subtle two-finger wave to the shadows behind the boarding desk. From the adjacent corridor, 4 uniformed airport police officers stepped into the light. They were accompanied by Greg Miller, the director of airport security. The heavy clack of their boots on the tile floor sounded like a gavel coming down. Brenda froze, her hand hovering over the counter. Mia let out a loud, genuine sob, covering her face with my stolen sun hat. Mrs. Brenda Hayes and Miss Mia Hayes, Greg Miller said, stepping past Julian and producing a pair of federal incident reports. You are being detained on suspicion of grand larceny, trespassing, and attempted corporate identity fraud. Arrested? Brenda gasped, stumbling backward as 2 officers flanked her. No, this is a family dispute. You can't arrest me for a family misunderstanding. The FAA doesn't care about your family disputes, ma'am, one of the officers said, unhooking handcuffs from his belt. Attempting to bypass a federal checkpoint with stolen executive credentials is a felony. Julian stepped closer, looking down at his mother-in-law. And as an officer of this airline, I am officially placing both of you on our permanent, lifetime no-fly list. You will never set foot on one of our aircraft again, across our entire global alliance. Mia completely broke. I told you this was a bad idea, she wailed at Brenda, throwing her mother completely under the bus. I told you we shouldn't have taken the folder. This is your fault. Shut up, Mia, Brenda yelled back as an officer gently but firmly took hold of her arm. Ma'am, please keep your voice down and come with us, the officer instructed. If you resist, we will add public disturbance and resisting arrest to the charges. As they began to guide my mother and sister away from the podium, Brenda twisted around, her eyes locking onto mine with a look of pure, concentrated venom. You're dead to me, Chloe, she screamed, her voice cracking. Do you hear me? You are no longer my daughter. I stood there, holding my husband's hand, and watched her being escorted away, her oversized designer bag dragging pathetically across the carpet. I know, I whispered to the empty space she left behind. And it feels amazing. The echo of my mother's final vitriolic scream faded down the concourse, swallowed by the ambient hum of the airport. For a few seconds, Gate A12 remained in a state of stunned, collective silence. The business travelers who had been aggressively ignoring the scene were now openly staring. A woman holding a sleeping toddler caught my eye and gave me a slow, empathetic nod of solidarity. Then, Sarah, the gate agent, gracefully shattered the tension. She cleared her throat, smoothed her uniform, and tapped her keyboard. "Well," Sarah announced over the PA system, her voice perfectly composed, "first-class boarding for Flight 802 to Maui will resume in just a moment. Thank you all for your patience." A collective sigh of relief washed over the waiting area. Julian turned to Sarah, a warm, apologetic smile replacing the glacial executive mask he'd worn just moments before. "Sarah, I am so incredibly sorry you had to deal with that," Julian said, his voice carrying genuine remorse. "I'll be sending in commendation to your station manager this afternoon. Your professionalism was exemplary." Sarah beamed, handing the navy blue leather folder across the counter. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. It's certainly a boarding process I won't forget anytime soon. Have a wonderful honeymoon." Julian took the folder, the silver airline crest gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and finally turned to me. The protective intensity in his eyes softened into deep, unwavering affection. He reached out and gently cupped my face, his thumb brushing against my cheekbone. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, the rest of the terminal melting away. "I know that was brutal. If you need to go home, if you need to delay the flight, we can." I closed my eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. I waited for the familiar, suffocating wave of guilt to crash over me. I waited for the internalized voice of my childhood to tell me I was a terrible daughter, that I had ruined everything, that I needed to go chase after my mother and beg for her forgiveness. But the wave never came. Instead, I felt an overwhelming, intoxicating lightness. The phantom weight I had been carrying on my shoulders for 29 years had vanished. The umbilical cord of toxic obligation had finally been severed, cut by a pair of silver handcuffs and a federal no-fly list. I opened my eyes and looked at my husband. "I have never been better in my entire life," I said, a real unforced smile breaking across my face. "Take me to Hawaii." Julian's grin was blinding. He laced his fingers through mine. "Your carriage awaits, Mrs. Vance." Because we held executive passes, we didn't just board the plane first. We were escorted down the jet bridge by the lead flight attendant, a woman named Maria, who greeted Julian with a hug. Stepping onto the wide-body jet felt like crossing the threshold into a completely different reality. The first-class cabin was an oasis of hushed luxury. There were no standard seats, only private, lie-flat pods encased in sleek, curved partitions. The air smelled faintly of lavender and fresh linen, a stark contrast to the stale, frantic energy of the terminal. "Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Vance," Maria said, gesturing to pods 2A and 2B, the exact seats Brenda had tried to claim as her own. "We have your preferred vintage chilled, and the chef has prepared the custom menu you requested for the flight." I sank into the plush, quilted leather of my pod. It was absurdly comfortable. A velvet amenity kit, noise-canceling headphones, and a plush duvet were neatly arranged on the side console. This was the exact luxury my mother had believed she was entitled to, simply for existing. Sitting in it now, knowing we had earned it, made it feel incredibly sweet. Julian settled into the pod next to mine, lowering the privacy divider between us. Within 60 seconds, Maria appeared with 2 crystal flutes and poured a stream of golden, perfectly chilled champagne. "To boundaries," Julian toasted, raising his glass. "To boundaries," I echoed, clinking my flute against his. The champagne tasted like absolute victory. As the rest of the passengers began to board the plane, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. The lock screen was a chaotic mess of notifications. 3 missed calls from an unknown local number, likely the airport police precinct where Brenda and Mia were currently being processed. A flurry of frantic, misspelled text messages from my Aunt Susan, Brenda's sister and chief flying monkey, demanding to know why Brenda was crying in a jail cell. 10 minutes ago, seeing those notifications would have sent my nervous system into overdrive. Now, I didn't even read them. I opened my settings, scrolled down, and turned the phone off. The screen went completely black. I tossed the lifeless brick into the deepest pocket of my carry-on bag and zipped it shut. A few minutes later, the heavy cabin doors were sealed. The jet bridge retreated. The massive engines roared to life, a deep, vibrating hum that resonated right through the floorboards. As the plane accelerated down the runway and finally lifted its nose into the morning sky, I looked out the window. The airport, the city, and all the generational trauma I had left behind shrank into tiny, insignificant grids below me. We breached the cloud line, bursting into the brilliant, blinding sunshine of a brand new day. I reached across the console and took Julian's hand, feeling completely, wonderfully free. While Julian and I were ascending through the clouds, sipping vintage champagne in the hushed luxury of our first-class pods, my mother and sister were experiencing a very different kind of departure. 30 feet beneath the bustling main concourse, hidden behind unmarked steel doors, was the Port Authority police holding precinct. It was a stark, sterile room, bathed in harsh, buzzing fluorescent light. There were no velvet ottomans or complimentary mimosas down here. There was only a bolted-down metal bench, a cinder-block wall, and the ticking of a cheap wall clock. Brenda Hayes, a woman who had spent her entire adult life manipulating the world to cater to her whims, was currently sitting on that metal bench. Her designer sunglasses hanging askew from the collar of her silk blouse. For the first 20 minutes in holding, Brenda had tried to deploy her usual tactics. She demanded to speak to the manager of the police. She threatened to sue the airport, the airline, and the city. She paced the small room, loudly declaring that this was a massive misunderstanding and that Julian was a vindictive, lying sociopath who had set her up. The 2 federal officers processing her paperwork didn't even look up from their keyboards. To them, Brenda wasn't a terrifying matriarch. She was just another unruly passenger who had let her entitlement override federal law. "Officer, I demand my phone," Brenda snapped, slamming her manicured hand against the metal desk. "I need to call my sister, and I want the number for the CEO of this airline. When I tell him how one of his executives is treating his own family, Julian will be fired by sunset." Officer Ramirez, a 20-year veteran of airport security, finally stopped typing. He leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and looked at my mother with a mixture of pity and profound exhaustion. "Mrs. Hayes," Ramirez said, his voice flat and devoid of any customer service pretense. "You seem to be under the illusion that you are sitting in a customer complaints office. You are not. You are sitting in a federal holding facility." He picked up a printed sheet of paper and slid it across the metal desk. "Let me outline exactly what is happening here," Ramirez continued. "You are being formally charged with trespassing in a restricted digital system and possession of stolen corporate property. Because the retail value of those executive passes exceeds $10,000, the theft charge is elevated to grand larceny. That is a felony, ma'am. The CEO of this airline isn't going to fire Mr. Vance. His corporate legal team is the one currently pressing the charges against you." Brenda stared at the paper. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her pale and deeply haggard. The reality of the word, felonies, hung in the sterile air, heavy and suffocating. Beside her, the golden child finally shattered. Mia had been quietly weeping since they were escorted away from the gate, her makeup running in dark, jagged streaks down her cheeks. But hearing the legal reality of their situation broke through her delusions. Mia realized that her mother's protective, narcissistic bubble had popped, and she was about to go down with the ship. So, like any true golden child raised in a toxic environment, Mia immediately turned on her creator to save herself. "I didn't do it!" Mia wailed, suddenly jumping up from the metal bench and pointing a shaking finger at Brenda. "It was all her idea! She stole the folder! She went into the hotel room and took it from the safe! I told her it was a bad idea, but she forced me to come with her!" Brenda whipped her head around, looking at her favorite daughter with sheer, unadulterated shock. "Mia! How dare you! We did this together! You were the one who packed my bags! I didn't want to go!" Mia sobbed loudly to the officers, completely rewriting history in real time. "She said Chloe wanted us to have them! I'm a victim here! Please, you can't arrest me! I have anxiety!" "Sit down, both of you," Ramirez barked, the sharp command echoing off the cinderblock walls. Both women snapped their mouths shut and sat, the toxic foundation of their relationship completely fracturing before their eyes. Brenda looked at Mia, realizing for the first time that the daughter she had coddled and spoiled her entire life possessed absolutely zero loyalty. The precinct door buzzed and opened. Greg Miller, the director of airport security, stepped into the room holding a clipboard. The local magistrate has agreed to release you on your own recognizance pending your court date, given you have no prior violent offenses, Greg stated coldly. However, before you are escorted off the premises, I have one final piece of paperwork. He handed Brenda and Mia each a thick, laminated document bearing the airline's official seal and a red watermark. This is a formal notice of ban, Greg explained. By the authority of the Vice President of Operations, you are both permanently placed on this airline's global no-fly list. You are banned from purchasing tickets, boarding aircraft, or entering any VIP lounges owned by this carrier or its international alliance partners. If you attempt to purchase a ticket, the system will reject it. If you attempt to enter our terminals, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. Brenda's hands shook as she took the paper. The words "Hundersclare Lifetime Ban" were printed in bold black ink. "Grab your luggage," Ramirez instructed, standing up and opening the holding cell door. "You are being escorted to the curb. Do not come back." 10 minutes later, Brenda and Mia stood on the exhaust-choked sidewalk outside the arrivals terminal. They had no rental car, no first-class pods, and no luxury vacation. Mia was furiously texting their Aunt Susan to come pick them up, refusing to even look at her mother. Brenda stood clutching the handles of her oversized designer suitcase, the Hawaiian sun hat crumpled in her hand. She looked up at the sky just in time to see a massive, wide-bodied jet banking gracefully through the clouds, heading west toward the Pacific. For the first time in her life, Brenda Hayes had to swallow the bitter, jagged pill of consequence. And there was absolutely no one left to blame but herself. 3 days later, the sterile, fluorescent lighting of Gate A12 felt like it belonged to another lifetime. I was lying on a plush, teakwood cabana lounger overlooking the crescent beach of Wailea, Maui. The air smelled of salt, coconut oil, and blooming plumeria. The Pacific Ocean stretched out in front of me, a canvas of impossible, glittering turquoise. Julian was down by the water, chatting with a concierge about booking a sunset catamaran sail, his sunglasses reflecting the golden afternoon light. For 72 hours, my phone had been buried at the bottom of my woven beach bag, powered completely down. It was the longest I had gone without being tethered to my family's digital demands since I was a teenager. And it was glorious. But as I sipped the last of my chilled hibiscus tea, a fleeting wave of curiosity washed over me. I didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt a clinical, detached desire to see exactly how the dust had settled. I reached into the bag, pulled out the heavy black rectangle, and held down the power button. The screen flared to life, and the phone immediately froze as the processor was slammed with a backlog of notifications. It vibrated continuously for 2 full minutes. 47 missed calls, 112 unread text messages, 14 new voicemails. I bypassed the voicemails from Brenda, which I knew would just be a chaotic mix of sobbing, screaming, and victim playing, and opened my texts. The most aggressive barrage wasn't from my mother or sister. It was from Aunt Susan. Susan was Brenda's older sister and the family's chief flying monkey. In the ecosystem of toxic families, the flying monkeys are the enablers, the ones who swoop in to do the abuser's bidding, guilt-tripping the victim into apologizing just to restore the dysfunctional status quo. Susan had sent me a novel. I adjusted my sunglasses and read the manifesto. Aunt Susan, Chloe Elizabeth. I cannot believe what you have done. Your mother is absolutely inconsolable. She and Mia had to take a $150 Uber home from the airport, and now she is facing thousands in legal fees for a simple misunderstanding. You humiliated her in public and let your husband treat her like a criminal. Aunt Susan, Pashalanmar family is family, Chloe. You never involve the police with family. You know how Brenda gets when she's stressed. She wasn't actually going to steal your trip. She just wanted to teach you a little lesson about respect. You need to call Julian's boss, RIHT, now and drop these ridiculous charges. Aunt Susan, Mia is having panic attacks. She might have a felony on her record because of your petty revenge. Be the bigger person, Chloe. Call your mother and apologize before you tear this family apart permanently. A week ago, reading those words would have sent my nervous system into a tailspin. I would have drafted a dozen panicked apologies, crying in the hotel bathroom while Julian tried to comfort me. I would have let them make me the villain. But sitting under the Hawaiian sun, surrounded by the luxury my husband and I had earned, I read Susan's messages and felt absolutely nothing but mild amusement. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost embarrassing. She wasn't actually going to steal your trip. I actually laughed out loud at that line. Brenda had literally been holding a mimosa at the boarding gate. I opened the keyboard. I didn't draft an apology. I didn't defend myself. I just established the final, impenetrable boundary. Chloe, hi Susan. Brenda broke into a hotel safe, stole $10,000 worth of non-transferable executive property, and attempted to commit federal identity fraud at a TSA checkpoint. Julian didn't press the charges. The airline's corporate legal team did. It is entirely out of my hands. If you want to spend your time and money defending a thief, that is your choice. But do not ever contact me again to demand an apology for someone else's crimes. Have a great life. I hit send. Then, I tapped Susan's profile. Block contact. I went to Brenda's contact. Block contact. Mia. Block contact. My cousins, my enabling uncle, everyone who had sent me a message demanding I cater to Brenda's delusions, I blocked them all. With every tap of the screen, the invisible chains my mother had wrapped around me grew weaker, until they finally snapped completely. My phone was quiet. Everything all right? I looked up. Julian was standing at the edge of the cabana, holding 2 fresh Mai Tais garnished with orchids. He nodded toward the phone in my hand, a protective, questioning look in his eyes. Everything is perfect, I smiled, tossing the phone back into the bag. I didn't even bother turning it off this time. It didn't matter. The noise couldn't reach me anymore. I reached out and took the drink, leaning back against the cushions. So, what time does the catamaran leave? The sunset in Maui didn't look real. It looked like a painting. Streaks of violent violet, molten gold, and deep, bruised pink bleeding across the horizon. Julian and I were sitting at the front of a luxury catamaran, the warm Pacific wind whipping through our hair as the boat sliced through the gentle evening swells. I had a glass of champagne in one hand, and my husband's hand securely wrapped in my other. For the first time in my 29 years on Earth, my mind was completely, wonderfully quiet. There was no underlying hum of anxiety, no subconscious calculation of what mood my mother would be in or what crisis Mia had manufactured to demand my attention. The tether had been cut. "A penny for your thoughts," Julian murmured, leaning close so I could hear him over the rush of the ocean and the snapping of the catamaran's sails. I smiled, resting my head on his shoulder. I was just thinking about the text message she sent me. The one from the airport. Julian's brow furrowed slightly. "Don't let her ruin this sunset, Chloe. She's exactly where she deserves to be." "She isn't ruining it," I assured him, and I meant it. I was just thinking about the exact phrasing she used. She said she was stealing our honeymoon to teach me a lesson. I took a sip of champagne, letting the cool, crisp liquid ground me in the present moment. "The irony is," I continued, looking out at the endless expanse of the ocean, she actually did. She taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. She taught me that her love is entirely conditional. She taught me that no amount of money, accommodation, or shrinking myself down will ever make her respect me. And because she finally pushed it so far, she taught me how to walk away, without a single ounce of guilt. Julian smiled, a deep, proud warmth in his eyes. He kissed the top of my head. Well, if we're talking about lessons, the legal department sent me a brief update this morning while you were swimming. I sat up a little straighter. Oh? Brenda's lawyer reached out to corporate, Julian said, his voice carrying that calm executive authority. She is desperately trying to settle out of court. To avoid felony jail time, she's going to have to plead guilty to a lesser charge, pay massive restitution fines to the airline, and complete hundreds of hours of community service. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. And Mia? Mia gave a full statement to the Port Authority completely implicating your mother as the mastermind, claiming she was a victim of emotional manipulation. Julian chuckled darkly. So, Brenda is now experiencing exactly what it feels like to be thrown under the bus by her precious golden child. But the absolute sweetest piece of justice, the cherry on top of this spectacular sundae of consequence, was the no-fly list. My mother spent her entire life projecting an image of wealthy, untouchable elite status to her country club friends. She had a highly publicized, deeply bragged about girls' trip to Cabo San Lucas, planned for next month with 4 of her most judgmental frenemies. She can't go to Cabo, I realized, a laugh bubbling up from my chest. Not on our airline, Julian confirmed. And since our airline is part of the largest global aviation alliance, she's flagged across 5 major international carriers. If she wants to get to Cabo, she's going to have to drive a rental car across the border. The image of Brenda Hayes, stripped of her VIP lounges, her first-class pods, and her stolen luxury, sitting in the back of a Greyhound bus, or facing the humiliating reality of explaining her federal flight ban to her country club friends, was the ultimate closure. It was a poetic, perfectly tailored consequence for a lifetime of entitlement. The catamaran banked gently, turning back toward the glowing lights of the resort. I thought about the girl I was just a week ago. The girl who cried in a hotel room, terrified of her mother's wrath. That girl was gone. She had been left behind at Counter 4. When the boat docked, Julian and I walked barefoot along the shoreline back to our suite. I didn't check my phone that night. I didn't check it the next day, either. In fact, for the rest of the honeymoon, it stayed in the hotel safe, a piece of plastic holding nothing but the frantic, irrelevant noise of a life I no longer lived. Brenda wanted to teach me a lesson. Class dismissed.